Welcome back to In Response EDH. As always, I'm your host Albert, and I'm glad you can join us for another great Commander gameplay video. Today we have a couple players making their first appearance on the channel, as well as a couple veterans. Joining us again is Chris, fresh off a win and ready for another, and today he'll be playing the Scarab God. This isn't your normal Scarab God deck. Of course, he wants to reanimate the best creatures in everyone's graveyard, but he also incorporates the ninjutsu ability to cheat big creatures into play. He keeps an opening hand with Puppeteer Click, Huguri, the Still Wind, Throat Slitter, Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths, Desert of the Mindful, and 2 Swamps. Next we have Ellie, who's new to the channel and is playing her Lathril, Blade of Elves deck. This Golgari Elf Ball deck wants to amass a huge elf army, which can be used to generate tons of mana or draw a lot of cards. Once in a commanding board state, Lathril's ability can use that army to drain her opponents to death. She keeps a 1-land opening hand containing Soul Ring, Seedborn Muse, Woodland Champion, Sereth the Viper's Fang, Emerald Medallion, Adventure Awaits, and a Gilt Leaf Palace. Joseph is back, and this time he's brought with him his new partner commander deck led by Kamahl and Tymna. This deck relies heavily on attacking. He wants to use Tymna's ability to keep him rich with card draw. The deck also wants to create a ton of creatures to get in for big chunks of damage, all while being buffed up by Kamahl and other Anthem effects. His opening hand consists of Coat of Arms, Sigarda's Summons, Increasing Devotion, Eiganjo, Seat of the Empire, Gaia's Cradle, Overgrown Tomb, and a Plains. Also joining us for the first time is one of our newest patrons, Pax, and he's here to throw the book at the table with his commander Codie. This deck is an Oops All Spells deck. It contains no permanents other than his commander, but does use the book to help pay for some of the big mana spells. Since this deck doesn't have any creatures to protect him, it really wants to ramp fast and cast some powerful spells to draw a lot of cards and create a ton of tokens to close out the game. He starts off with Inspiring Refrain, Reshape the Earth, Cling to Dust, Baleful Mastery, a Plains, an island, and a forest. Before we get started, we would like to remind you, if you enjoy our content and would like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron. When you do, you're not only contributing to the channel's growth, but you're also being entered in our monthly giveaways, as well as receiving patron-only perks. All proceeds of our Patreon are reinvested back into the channel to bring you the best content possible. We would also like to thank our new sponsor, Dragon Shield. Hit the link in the description of this video to check out the best products out there to protect your cardboard. You can also support the channel by using our affiliate link when purchasing product on TCG Player. With that said, and the introductions out of the way, let's start the game. One of our Twitch viewers chose Chris to go first, so he starts us off by playing an island and then passes to Ellie.
I will draw for turn. I will play a Glint Leaf Palace. I will reveal Priestess Titania so it comes in untapped. Nope. And then I'll play a Soul Ring.
Beautiful.
And then I'll tap the Soul Ring to play an Emerald Medallion.
There you go. There you go.
I will pass my turn.
Excellent.
Just so you guys know, I'm not the threat.
Pax doesn't have quite the explosive start Ellie does and plays a forest and passes. Joseph plays a Gaia's Cradle that doesn't currently produce any mana and passes. Chris starts turn 2 by playing a tapped Desert of the Mindful and passes. Ellie then casts a Woodland Champion, paying 1 green mana thanks to the medallion, and ends her turn. Pax then drops an island on the field and passes to Joseph. Joseph then plays an Ancient Tomb as his land for turn and passes. Chris draws for turn and plays a basic Swamp. He then taps out to cast Satoru Umezawa. Ellie then takes her turn by casting Adventure Awaits to look at the top 5 cards of her library. She chooses a creature from among them and puts it into her hand. She then plays a Golgari Rot Farm as her land drop, bouncing the Gilt Leaf Palace back to her hand. She then ends her turn and passes to Pax. He plays a Plains as his land for turn and taps 2 to cast a Farseek. Pax finds a Swamp and puts it onto the field tapped. Joseph draws for turn and just plays a tapped overgrown tomb and passes. Chris draws for turn and plays another basic swamp. He then taps 4 to cast Lathril, Oracle of Half-Truths. As it enters, he chooses Ellie to look at the top 3 cards of his library and separate them into 2 piles. Chris decides to take the face down pile and bin the Boneyard Parlay. Ellie replays the Gilt Leaf Palace, again revealing the Priestess Titania to have it come in untapped. She then taps out to cast her commander, Lathril, Blade of the Elves. Pax then untaps and draws. He then taps 3 mana to continue ramping and casts Kodama's Reach. He then puts a plains into play tapped and a mountain to his hand, which he plays as his land for turn. Joseph starts his turn by playing Eiganjo, Seat of the Empire. He then taps some mana, taking 2 from the Ancient Tomb, to cast one of his commanders, Tymna the Weaver. Chris draws for turn and plays another swamp. He then moves to combat.
You got something sneaky to put in there?
I got a little bit of something.
Am I dead?
No. No, you're fine.
Okay,
you're
okay.
fine.
Chris taps 4 mana to ninjutsu in a Fleet Swallower. The fish hits Joseph for 6, and Satoru hits Pax for 2. Satoru then lets Chris look at the top 3 cards of his library. He chooses one to put in his hand, and the others on the bottom of his library. After that, Ellie takes her turn and draws. She then moves straight into combat and swings Lathril at Pax, and the Woodland Champion at Chris. Since Lathril did 2 damage to a player, Ellie gets to make 2 Elf Warrior tokens. The Woodland Champion sees him enter and gets to put 2 +1/+1 counters on itself. On her second main phase, she taps out to cast a Seedborn Muse. When Pax goes to untap, Ellie does too. Pax then decides to pay 3 to cast the only permanent in his deck, his commander, Codie, Vociferous Codex. After that, he suspends Inspiring Refrain with 3 time counters on it. He then ends his turn. Joseph draws for turn and plays a Plains. He also skips his main phase and goes straight to combat, swinging Tymna at Chris for 2. Joseph does gain 2 life, but pays 1 life to draw a card with Tymna. On his second main phase, he pays 1 green mana to cast an Avacyn's Pilgrim. After that, he taps out, losing 2 life from the Ancient Tomb, to cast Primal Vigor. Chris starts turn 6 by playing another island. He keeps up the trend of not casting anything on his first main phase and goes straight to combat. He swings the Fleet Swallower at Joseph. When he does, the attack trigger happens and Chris chooses Joseph to mill half of his deck. Joseph then puts 37 cards in his graveyard and takes 6 damage. Now that Joseph has a sizable graveyard, Chris decides to cast his commander, the Scarab God.
Alright, does Ellie get a land? Ellie got a land!
Hey!
Ellie got a land! It's a swamp!
She then pays 1 green mana to cast Priestess Titania, and follows that up by casting an Imperious Perfect. After that, she moves to combat and swings Lathril at Pax. Pax can't block and takes 3 damage. Lathril then makes 3 elves, but since Joseph has a Primal Vigor on board, she makes 6 elves instead.
That guy gets really big.
And this gets 6 counters.
Woo! It gets 12 counters.
It gets 12 counters, that's right.
Okay, I just want you guys to know,
Yeah.
I didn't read the card.
Alright.
Pax then untaps, and so does Ellie. He also removes a counter from the Inspiring Refrain, and then draws for turn. First thing he does is tap 4 to activate Codie, to add Wooburg to his mana pool. He then spends that mana to cast a Sylvan Reclamation. On cast, Codie will trigger and allow him to exile cards from the top of his deck until he finds an instant or sorcery with lesser value. He can then play that spell for free. He finds Road to Ruin and casts a road half of the card, to search up a forest to the field tapped.
So now wait, this whole thing will resolve. And yes,
Okay.
I have to target this because you're popping off with it.
So I got to use it before you did, Joseph, I'm sorry.
I don't have a...
Fine.
He then chooses the Emerald Diamond on Ellie's side of the board, and she exiles it. He then goes to end his turn, but on his end step, Ellie taps 10 elves to activate her commander's ability, draining the table for 10 and gaining 10. With the activation on the stack, Pax casts a Baleful Mastery, targeting Lathril, and is nice enough to allow Joseph to draw a card. Lathril's effect still happens, but at least he stops her from doing it on everyone else's turn.
Wish I could have had fun
I
with
untap with
Primal
you.
Vigor.
Thank you for letting me use it.
He then draws for turn and taps some mana.
Okay,
Exactly.
just increasing devotion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very
Oh,
good. Very
nice.
good.
I'll make 5 2-pox.
Yeah, that's cool.
8. I have 8 mana.
And then taps the Cradle for 7 green mana, and uses 4 to cast Guardian Project. He then follows that up by casting a Beast Whisperer, forgetting to tap the Avacyn's Pilgrim to help pay for it. He then draws a card off the Guardian Project. After that, he takes 2 from the Ancient Tomb and ends his turn. Chris draws for turn, plays a Swamp, and then goes straight to combat. He swings his fish at Ellie, and she chooses to block it with the huge Woodland Champion. The attack trigger still happens, and she mills half of her library.
Yep. So you block it this time.
Yes. Go away.
Crazy.
Chris follows that up by casting a Burnished Heart. Ellie casts Raise Draugr to return 2 elves back from the graveyard to her hand. In response to the targets, Chris chooses to exile the Farhaven elf with his commander, and makes a 4/4 zombie version of it, denying Ellie of a potential land.
I'll have
And then you get
Diana
a...
DeVito be my 4/4.
Ellie then moves to her turn and draws.
You're doing all this with just...
I'm gonna
These little itty
He's
bitty
doing
lands.
really, yeah.
I'm gonna play a Llanowar Elves,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna play an Arbor Elf.
She then decides to tap the Priest of Titania to create 13 green mana, and then taps a Swamp to recast her commander.
Yay, welcome back.
Yep.
Not really.
Ellie follows that up by casting Vigor. She then uses one of the remaining floating mana to tap the Imperious Perfect and create another elf token, which will put another +1/+1 counter on the Woodland Champion. She then moves to combat,
18.
18/18.
Woo! That's a good little Woodland Champion.
Well, see you later, Heart.
Yeah.
Since 3 damage was prevented with Vigor, the champion will get an additional 3 counters. After that, she passes. Pax untaps and then removes a time counter from the Inspiring Refrain. He then draws a card and finds a River Glide pathway and plays it. After that, he activates his commander again to add Wooburg. He then taps the rest of his mana to cast a Plague Wind. Before the spell resolves, he exiles cards until he finds a spell with lesser CMC. He just so happens to find one right off the top of his deck, and Utter End. Pax being the nice guy he is, he lets Ellie choose the target, and she chooses Joseph's Guardian Project.
You're welcome.
Here we go.
Please remember what I did today.
Now I have a sad cradle again.
Joseph now starts his turn, and plays a command tower as his land drop. Ellie then has a question for Pax.
You couldn't just let me win.
No, how scary.
Joseph starts his rebuilding phase by casting Tymna again. He then ends his turn. Chris draws his card for turn and plays a Forge of Heroes as his land drop. After that, he recasts Atris. This time he chooses Pax to make the piles, and Chris chooses the face-up pile this time. He then recasts his commander and passes.
Alright. Draw! Guess what? I didn't get a land.
Ah, sorry.
Ellie then pays 2 to cast an Elvish Vanguard. With nothing else, she ends her turn. Pax's Inspiring Refrain finally loses the last time counter and allows him to draw 2 cards. The Refrain then gets another 3 time counters, and Pax draws for turn. He plays a Swamp as his land for turn. After that, he activates Codie again to add Wooburg and taps 4 mana to cast Reshape the Earth. Codie's ability goes on the stack, and he exiles cards until he finds a Brainstorm, which he then casts. The Reshape the Earth then resolves, and of the 10 lands he finds, Field of the Dead is the most important. Field of the Dead sees all the lands enter and makes Pax 10 zombie tokens. Joseph then starts his turn by tapping the Ancient Tomb and losing 2 life to cast a Talisman of Hierarchy. He follows that up by casting Toxic Deluge and paying 2 life into it to kill off Pax's board. Chris starts his turn off by casting a Puppeteer Click. As it enters, he chooses to look through Joseph's massive graveyard. He then brings back an Eternal Witness on his side of the board. When it enters, he looks through his graveyard and returns a Boneyard Parlay. He then moves to combat.
I'm
You
open.
are open.
Yep, I deserve this.
2.
2?
Yeah.
He then goes to his end step, and the Eternal Witness gets sacrificed and exiled. Ellie draws for turn and misses yet another land drop. She uses her Soul Ring to foretell a card, and then follows that up by casting an Elvish Archdruid. After that, she ends her turn. Pax untaps and removes a time counter from the refrain, and then draws for turn. He plays an island as his land drop, and activates Codie again. He then casts a Storm Herd, and with it on the stack, Codie's ability triggers. He then finds a Seize the Storm, which creates a 9/9 elemental creature, since he has 9 instant or sorcery spells in his graveyard. The Storm Herd then resolves, and he creates 21 Pegasus tokens. After that, he pays 7 mana to cast Inspired Ultimatum.
I gained 5 life first. I should have done that first and did this. One.
He chooses Ellie to deal 5 damage to, and then draws 5 cards. He then taps his last 5 mana to cast Baral's Expertise. Pax chooses to bounce both of Chris's creatures and Ellie's Archdruid. The Expertise allows him to play a spell with CMC 4 or less for free, so he casts a Harrow, sacrificing a forest to grab 2 lands to the field, making 2 more zombies. On his end step, Chris activates the Scarab God and looks at Ellie's graveyard. He chooses the Seedborn Muse and exiles it, making a 4/4 zombie copy of it. Joseph then starts his turn and plays a forest as his land drop. He then taps 3 to cast a Soul Transfer. Joseph chooses a second mode to return a creature from the graveyard to his hand. He targets Rick's Steadfast Leader, but in response, Pax casts a Cling to Dust to exile it. Pax then gains 3 life and draws a card. After that, Joseph takes 2 damage from the Ancient Tomb to cast Odric, Master Tactician, and passes. Chris starts turn 10 by casting his commander again. He follows that up by casting Thran Dynamo. He taps it to cycle Polluted Mire and draws a card. After that, he moves to his end step and discards down to 7. Ellie then starts her turn, and both her and Chris get to untap.
Hey guys, guess what? I got a land.
Hey!
She then recasts the Elvish Archdruid and passes. On her end step, Chris activates his commander to make a copy of Atris. Now it's Joseph's turn to make the piles. And this time, Chris takes the face down pile. He then activates his commander again and exiles the Adeline Resplendent Cathar in Joseph's graveyard. He's not done though. He then targets Dwynen in Ellie's graveyard and makes a zombie copy of it as well. Pax removes a time counter from the refrain and then draws for turn. He plays another island and makes a zombie.
Oh, I'm evil. I'm sorry.
I just want to make it one more turn.
I'm
I
sorry.
got picked on.
He then taps 7 to cast Blatant Thievery. Chris can't let this happen and snaps off a mana drain.
And now this is when he does the scary thing.
This time Pax decides to activate Codie and he casts In Garruk's Wake. With it on the stack, he exiles cards off the top of his library and finds a Profane Tutor. He then casts it and goes to search up a card to his hand. While Pax searches, Chris activates his commander to exile Ellie's Llanowar Visionary in order to draw a card. Pax then finds the card he wants, and the In Garruk's Wake finally resolves. With the way now clear, he moves to combat and swings all his Pegasus at Ellie, an 11/11 elemental at Chris, and 3 zombies at
This is
Joseph.
a weird way to save you. Funny enough. I'm gonna Tainted Strike one of them.
This saves Joseph, and he only takes 4 damage. Pax then moves to his second main phase and casts an all-rounds Epiphany to take another turn and make a couple birds. He then moves to his next turn and draws 2 cards off the suspended refrain. It then gets 3 more time counters, and then Pax draws return. Pax then goes straight to combat and swings enough creatures to take out Ellie, and then works out the math for the rest of the table.
And then 1 to you and 1 to you. So that's 14. And then...
1.
Oh yeah, I attack you with Codie.
Codie's a creature.
Yep. I just realized. I forgot.
Congratulations to Pax for winning on his first appearance. This Codie deck seemed like a lot of fun. Any deck that runs Storm Herd is alright with me. He was able to ramp pretty steadily to keep him in the game, as well as doing a good job of keeping the board under control with some timely one-sided board wipes. He really pulled away in the late game by building just too big of an army for the table to deal with. Ellie had an impressive showing despite missing land drop after land drop. She definitely got out to a fast start and looked like she could have closed the game out early. Having Seedborn Muse and tons of elves on the field looked like she was just going to run away with the game. But the mana screw and the board wipes really set her back, to the point she was never able to get back into the game. Joseph had a better showing over his last appearance, but also suffered from all the board wipes. That and a slow start really kept him from making a huge impact on the game. But he did help Ellie a lot by playing that Primal Vigor. Chris had another strong showing this week. The Scarab God is a very resilient commander. It's no wonder it's so popular. The ninjutsu portion of this deck really worked out early on in the game, by making Ellie and Joseph fill their graveyards early on. Later on in the game, once he copied the Seedborn Muse, he appeared to be the favorite to win, but Pax was able to close it out before that can happen. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment, and if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Before we go, we'd like to give a big thank you to our amazing patrons. We are glad to have your support and thankful for each and every one of you. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.